Come to the edge. We might fall. Come to the edge. It's too high. Come to the edge. So they came, and he pushed, and they flew. Those few simple lines from the contemporary poet Christopher Logue give us a little hint of what we can do if we are prepared to move beyond our own preconceived limitations. The limitations that often we are taught and told and then believe. When you come to the edge and you take that leap of faith, you open yourself to the world of infinite possibilities. You open yourself to a field of information that is your right to be able to tap into. However, when you were born, you were a tiny little being, and all you did was pee, poo, suck, and cry. That's what you knew. You were instinctive. And as you were nurtured, and as you were taken care of, you started to become a little bit more aware. And as you became more aware, you were taught things by your significant others. And the more you started to learn, you became aware that you were part of a group's version of good, bad, right, wrong, appropriate, and inappropriate. And because you were part of that group, they would keep reinforcing their version of good, bad, right, wrong, appropriate, and inappropriate. At the very moment you were born, somewhere on the other side of the planet was also a little being being born. At that same moment, we didn't get to 6 point whatever billion because we take gaps. At the same moment you were born, on the other side, somewhere on this planet, was another little being being born who also pee-pooed, sucked, and cried. And that little person had a very similar experience to yours. They were taught their group's version of good, bad, right, wrong, appropriate, and inappropriate. And all of their group's versions was reinforced as well. And as these two young beings grew and developed and became entrenched and habituated to their group's version of good, bad, right, wrong, etc., they became aware of justifying what they did and how they did it. So that after not too long, they learned to judge difference rather than recognize difference. And so instead of being a part of, they became more and more apart from. And that's when the shit hits the fan. Because the more you think you are apart from, the less you can be a part of all of this incredible potential that's open to everyone. If you can just drop all the BS of your group's version of good, bad, right, wrong, etc. We're interesting beings. When you step to the edge and you start to explore. And you become aware of how much you are being excluded from because of what you've been taught and what you now believe. A strange and interesting thing has happened to you, because it doesn't matter what your group is or what your version is, you are still part of Homo sapiens. And you have a brain. All of us, doesn't matter what your group's version is, doesn't matter whether you eat with chopsticks or your fingers or knives and forks or a spoon, you have one of these. Otherwise, you wouldn't be one of the 6 point whatever billion with your version of whatever. Now, when we all lived in caves, I sometimes don't think that's so long ago. The anthropologists say it's a couple of million years ago, but I mean, I still think there are a lot of people who are still a bit trapped in a cave. Anyway, when we lived in caves, there was a very, very important part of our then still quite underdeveloped brain, and that was called the amygdala, this little beautiful piece of tissue there. And that amygdala is the size of a walnut, of an almond, sorry. And it has two little halves, a left and a right half, to this little almond-sized thing. Now, that amygdala was very important to get us to where we are now, which I still, again, don't think is that much further than where we were then. However, we dress different and we look different and we eat different and we fly in aeroplanes. Those days, we used to hit each other over the head and run away from mammoths. And it was because this thing, this amygdala, helped us pick up memories, formulate a memory, so that we could then know how to survive. So the amygdala took memories, formulated them, and put them in a little box so that we could understand fight, flight. So that if the mammoth was running towards us, we knew either to run like hell or call all our friends with their spears and do something about it. And so we continued evolving. This beautiful brain started evolving. I must tell you that way back in those days, we evolved. We evolved through a long era of Australopithecus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus. We realized we could actually stand on 2 feet. And eventually we evolved to Homo sapiens, sapiens, which is, I'm told, what we are now. During that time, this lovely brain that we have did an interesting thing. It caused our skulls to get bigger. And our skulls needed to get bigger because this brain was increasing in size. So when we were walking around and dragging each other in and out of caves, we had about 500 mils of brain matter, and we now have about 1.5 mils of brain matter. And during that long march through evolution, we developed this, the cortex, especially the frontal cortex. Now, the frontal cortex is really our higher reasoning. Remember, the amygdala has taught us about fight, flight. I remember that happening, and I know exactly what to do when that happens. I got to run like hell. I've got to be in high stress mode. But the frontal cortex that developed actually started to use more of our senses. And the frontal cortex actually would say, hang on, let's use some reasoning. Yes, when you saw that snake, it was really scary. And you're seeing another snake now, but that snake that scared you and made you run was literally, you were about to stand on it. The snake you're seeing now is 7 meters away from you. So you're okay. And so these two, the amygdala and the cortex, started to work together so that we weren't scared shitless every time we saw something. But then a lot of things changed as well. More and more modern life. So the amygdala also puts out a whole lot of hormones and things. And the interesting thing about the amygdala is that it works automatically. It doesn't give a shit about the reasoning of the frontal cortex. It says, no, wait a bit, let's think about it first. This isn't so serious. Your boss is in a bad mood today, but you know your boss isn't always like that. The amygdala then starts to hijack you. And when the amygdala hijacks you, the poor frontal cortex doesn't stand a chance because it goes into fight, flight, and it stays there. And most of us are kind of living that way these days. We're in fight, flight all the time. And we've kind of been taught to be like that. Watch out. Keep your back covered. Don't trust anyone and don't trust yourself. And how did all of this happen as well? How do we actually make sense of our world? Well, our 5 natural senses are actually our interface between the environment out there and the environment within our bodies. We need that interface. We need our 5 senses to act in a way that keeps us sane, or partly sane. And we are taught all kinds of myth perceptions about our 5 senses. I want you to just think about it. Without your 5 natural senses, you wouldn't know where you're going. You would not be able to respond to a loud bang. You wouldn't feel the touch of a loved one. You wouldn't know that what you've just put in your mouth is going to kill you. Out. And you wouldn't pick up the pheromones that make you chemically attracted to someone else. So it's part of our survival. It's part of who we are and how we need to be to get through this world. But still, amygdala seems, in this day and age, to want to take over. And then we have this habituated thinking about danger, fear. Don't do this, because we're also taught that. Don't trust those people because they eat with sticks. Don't trust those people because they eat with their hands. You know, that's disgusting. So all those things that we learn and we are taught to believe we are right are called paradigms. In other words, cranial toilets. It means you got your brains in a lavatory because that's all you think you can do. And what a waste of a life. So what is a paradigm? It's a fixed and rigid way of thinking and looking at things because you're too scared to try something different. Imagine if paradigms had not shifted, we would still think this world was flat. And Christopher Columbus set out, he had no clue where he was going to, but he was pretty sure that the planet wasn't flat. We shifted our paradigms when we walked on the moon. We shifted our paradigms when the very first heart transplant was performed in this country. because someone was brave enough to step up to the edge and say, well, let's see where the hell this goes. Because if I don't step up to the edge, I'll never know. I'll be stuck. And I'll be the same old, same old, same old. I am hoping that this weekend I'm going to teach you to become one of the black sheep. Because if you really know what's happening on the planet, it's only the white sheep that follow each other to the slaughterhouse. Black sheep's too clever. And the black sheep is incorrectly labeled simply because it does not want to be stuck with that group's version of good, bad, right, wrong, appropriate, and inappropriate. The black sheep understands the two middle fingers. And the black sheep knows also how to do it politely. Because the black sheep or the open-minded person knows that their brain is not only controlled by the amygdala. And trust me, we need the amygdala. It's very important. And it sits in a very important part of the brain. But the funny thing about it is that if we're walking around with a shoe that really hurts us, we take the shoe off and put on a pair of comfortable shoes. But hell, we won't do that with our way of living, will we? Because that's what we were taught to do. Well, through the long march of evolution, we've been taught a lot of things. And there have always been people who have been prepared to push the paradigms. There have always been people who have said, let's try something different. If you think about the great scientists in the world, and that's a really interesting subject as well, some of the best scientists in the world, when they started to push the paradigms, they got blocked out of that world. Galileo Galilei realized that not quite what the Catholics were saying is that the earth is the center of the universe. He developed a telescope and he said, my God, it isn't so. The sun is what we're revolving around. And none of those people wanted their paradigm shifted. So Galileo Galilei, because he would not recant, spent the rest of his life under house arrest. We're still doing that shit today, you know, putting people under house arrest because we don't like what they say. Most of us, until we learn how to use our minds, put ourselves in our own house arrest. We lock ourselves up in our own houses because we're too scared to even go and see what the neighbors are doing. We don't have to like what they're doing, but we don't even want to go and have a look. So we judge them on hearsay and on stereotypical evidence. And then we get old and die. What a waste of a life. When you could really be having fun and just going out there and exploring and being part of your inner child and even learning to heal the wounds of the inner child, because we all have wounds. We all have stuff. All of our stuff, in fact, starts in utero. So we learn to walk through life a little bit differently. But you need to be willing. When you are prepared to come to the edge, you realize that there's a door. All it needs is to be pushed. It's never locked except by ourselves. So here we have our 5 senses that help us make sense of our world. What we don't realize actually is that we're energetic beings and part of the quantum world. I love it when I'm traveling and people say to me, what do you do? I say, I teach a quantum physics-based brain development course. Really? You must be really clever. Yes, I am, because I know how to use my brains. I didn't always, though. I always knew how to use them in the rigid left brain way I was taught. But then I learned MindScape, and so I learned how to use my brains a little differently. We are energetic beings made out of millions and millions and millions and millions of cells. Every single cell in your body has a positive and a negative charge. Basic physics. Every single cell in your body has your DNA, RNA, which means your toenail knows what you're putting in your mouth because it's connected. Your bumhole knows what you're putting in your mouth too, especially if it's not going to like what you're putting in your mouth. So we are deeply connected as beings within ourselves. We're part of an energetic field because every single thing on this planet, in this universe, is energy. And energy is information, different forms of information. And, you know, I give this talk to many people, especially the scientific people. And by the way, I come from a scientific background. I must have done something terrible in a previous life to have done that. But anyway, I come from a scientific background. But when you talk to these people about energy, they say, no, that's that woo-woo stuff. And you can even say to the cardiologist, yeah, but what are you doing when you do an ECG? I'm measuring the electrical activity of the heart. Well, yeah, but that's different. Yeah, in a way it is different. It's a different energy to solar energy or hydro energy or thermal energy, but it is still all a form of energy. And the other interesting thing about energy is that it is always in spin. If you've even done basic physics, you know atoms, protons, neutrons, electrons are all spinning. And we even sometimes say, oh, I'm in a flat spin. We don't realize that we are tapping into that field. And the spin is so great that we're actually on planet Earth spinning around the sun at 65,000 miles an hour. So it's all spin. If you look at nature, nature shows us whirlwinds, cyclones, and if we're not really awake, it gives us hurricanes. But if you look at them, they're all spinning. Even the little dust devil in the veld is spinning. And the interesting thing is that in the southern hemisphere, they spin anti-clockwise. And in the northern hemisphere, they spin clockwise because of the opposite poles. So we're a part of all of this wonderful energy, and yet we keep ourselves apart from it because of the stuff we've been taught and chosen to believe. Now, there's nothing wrong with you believing what you believe. What is wrong is believing that that's the only way it is. That's the lavatorial brain. That's the darkness of mind. You might as well be able to put your head up your own backside, because that's what you're excluding yourself from, all of this. Why do we do that? Often because we're afraid of what people might say, especially because of collective consciousness. Now, I just want to speak a little bit about collective consciousness. There's a brilliant psychologist. I think one of my students this weekend might even have heard of him. His name is Carl Jung. And Carl Jung was taught by Freud. And Freud believed that we are beings that are governed by our instincts and drives. But Carl Jung took it a little further. He said, no, there's a bit more to us than that. Well, you know, all the Indian sages have been saying that for so many years. There's far more to us than that, just being instincts and drives. But Carl Jung said there is a spirituality about us. There is an essence, a collective consciousness, which really connects all of us, Homo sapiens. But within the collective consciousness, there is also a collective unconscious. And it's the collective unconscious that relates to your group's version of good, bad, right, wrong, appropriate, and inappropriate. It's the mores, the belief systems, the archetypal memories of a particular group, which explains why Italians like spaghetti, Indians like curry, very hot curry, Greek women have got moustaches, and for some reason, South Africans like rugby. It's that collective unconscious that binds us together to help us. It's cohesive. And those mores and rules and values that we are learning are there to guide us, not to dictate to us and become a dogma. And now in this modern era, we have AI. AI has a collective consciousness too, if you think about it. If you've done any research on artificial intelligence, it is tapping into the collective consciousness of all the collective unconscious. And that's something to really be aware of. So here we are, and we have these abilities to tap into the field there with our 5 senses, which try to help us make sense of our version of good, bad, etc. And you know, the mind, well, there's an interesting topic. The mind is simply an interface between you and the world out there and how you make sense of it. And the mind gets very lazy. It will always look for ratification for what it believes. And your eyes will always see and interpret what they want to, which means that much of life is invisible to you because you've only been taught to look at things one way or hear things one way or do things one way. Now, if you think about us as beings and what we've been taught, each and every one of you and all of us, 6 billion whatevers, mostly started off as 2 cells colliding in a very dark tunnel. And those 2 cells already had a knowing, a consciousness. Those 2 cells knew how to start dividing. And as they divided, they became aware of being able to differentiate. So some of the cells would say, I'm going to be Paula's hair. I'm going to be Ellen's teeth. I'm going to be Marlie's bone cells. Now, if that doesn't blow your mind, what will? So all of that differentiation got us to be this, in this Rolls Royce, with this mind and brain. What a miracle. And we keep limiting ourselves. And we keep believing people who say, you're not good enough. You're not pretty enough. You're not thin enough. You're not smart enough. You're not fast enough. You're not enough of what? You are more than enough. When you lie down and go to sleep at night, you don't have to tell your lungs. They know to breathe. Your bladder knows. Your kidneys are going to carry on working, but your bladder knows. Wake her up so she doesn't pee in the bed. It's miraculous. But we don't acknowledge it. We don't see the miracle we are. Well, part of that is to do with the mind and how it's been trained. So we have to untrain it and retrain it. So when you start in the class tomorrow, I have a little piece of equipment. It's called a burr, and I drill a hole into all of your skulls, and I blow some fresh air in there. And hopefully the bad stuff comes out your ears, and then you'll be a different person. So yeah, we have in this wonderful nature that we are part of, an organ called the brain. And you know, nature has been very frugal with her patterning. The brain looks like a walnut. The amygdala looks like an almond. Your lungs look like upside down trees. Kidney beans look just like your kidneys. And this brain of ours has two hemispheres, a left and a right hemisphere, joined by a beautiful tissue called the corpus callosum. And the corpus callosum is what acts as an interface between your left and your right hemisphere. Now, your left hemisphere works with logic, pre-programmed knowledge, computation. It's your left brain that knows to put on your socks before your shoes. So it does things sequentially, step by step. And because of that, it works a little bit slower. On the other side of your skull is your right hemisphere. Your imaginative, creative, intuitive, rhythmic brain. It knows about dance. It knows, not like the left brain, red, orange, yellow goes the rainbow. It sees the whole rainbow. And because it can see the bigger picture, it works much quicker. Up until the time you were about 3 years old, you were only functioning with your right brain. You could draw, you could sing, you could dance, you could explore. And then you started learning your version of good, bad, right, wrong, appropriate, and inappropriate. And then you got sent to school so that you could become boring like everybody around you. Logical, computational, rules. And so increasingly you lost that imaginative, creative, wonderful side of you. And if you dared step there, you would be called ADD or ADHD. Child doesn't pay attention, talks in class. And then they'd put you on Ritalin, perhaps. I have a theory. I think teachers should be put on Ritalin because then they would be better able to cope with the vast consciousness of children today. Apart from which, they're still also teaching 40 years ago's methodology. And the young kids of today, we're part of evolution. We don't live in caves anymore. We don't walk dragging our hands along the ground anymore. We've evolved, which means our consciousness has also evolved. Be sure, the way I thought as a 20-year-old is not the way some of you thought as a 20-year-old. Not at all. And the way I thought wasn't the way my mother thought or my grandmother. So consciousness is evolving all the time too. Now, why don't we actually participate in it? Why don't we actually just say, to hell with this, I'm going to try? Well, what might the neighbors say? What's your boss going to say? What's your husband, your wife, your partner going to say if you suddenly decide to do something entirely different? Something wrong. Must be hormones or menopause or whatever. What are they smoking? Just because you dare to be different. So now you have a left brain and a right brain. For most of your life, you are using primarily your left brain. We need logic, trust me. We need to be able to compute. We need to understand and know things. But we've excluded it to the extent that we no longer are in touch with our intuition. That little voice in your head, that gut feeling, you know, you hear it. You hear that little voice that says, don't go down, there's going to be a traffic jam. You think, I'll go anyway. And then, oh, why didn't I listen? Albert Einstein said that the left brain is the faithful servant and the right brain is the sacred gift. But sadly, we have chosen to worship the faithful servant and ignore the sacred gift. So God-given right. So now we are going to be stepping this weekend into the world of quantum physics. And even if you can't add, it's fine, because quantum physics will do it for you. You're going to step into the world of great imagination, like the great right-brained people of the world, the Albert Einsteins, the Chris Barnards, the Mozarts, the Freddie Mercurys, people who dared to go to the edge and just be different. We all have that ability. We all have the ability to step into the world of quantum physics. And the quantum world is about entrainment of energy. The ancient people knew how to do it. All the pyramid societies, the Aztecs, the Incas, the Peruvians, the Mayans, the Egyptians, all built their pyramids in exact replica to certain constellations. What did they know? And we still haven't figured out how the pyramids were built. And if you go to Mexico and you see those enormous structures there, we don't even have the mechanical ability to pick up some of those granite blocks. And those granite blocks don't even come from there. So what were the ancients able to do and harness that we have lost along the way? They were able to entrain energy. And we can do it too. And when you think about the quantum world, way back in 1665, a Dutch mathematician by the name of Christian Huygens was wondering how it was that the pendulums of the clocks in his home were all swinging in unison. Some of you are too young to even know what a pendulum clock looks like. Being a mathematician, he thought, well, there must be something going on here. So he stopped them all and he started them from different angles. And then he observed. And after a while, he noticed that some of them sped up and some slowed down until they had entrained the energy and they were all swinging in unison. Nature does it too. If you are able to go out into nature and see fireflies, you will see them all flickering away. And then something happens because Billy Firefly is looking for Sally Firefly. And the moment that connection's made, suddenly all the fireflies are doing that at the same time. They have entrained their energy. We do it all the time too, except we're silly enough to call it Coincidence. Carl Jung said there's no such thing as coincidence. It's called synchronicity. I'm sure all of you have had an experience where you go, you think, oh, I must phone my friend Michaela. And as you're walking to the phone rings, and I pick it up and say, hi, it's Dale. Hi, it's Michaela. Oh, what a coincidence. Not at all. How many of you have had imaginary friends as children? None of you? Don't be shy. Well, you didn't have an imaginary friend, Ellen and Carly. You were thought in training a child somewhere on this planet. And so those friends normally would stay your friend because there was that connection going all the time. Today we use the internet. It's the same thing. It's the right brain people who developed the internet based exactly on that. Apollo 14, Ed Mitchell, a scientist and an astronaut, the sixth man to step onto the moon, was busy doing some interesting experiments on what was then called extrasensory perception with a biologist by the name of Dr. Joseph B. Ryan. In Apollo 14, 250,000 miles above planet Earth at a specific time, each orbit, Ed Mitchell would take what were called Zener cards. And Zener cards just looked like playing cards, but they had shapes on them, squares, rectangles, and he'd shuffle them and he would put them out in a sequence. He did it in secret because the other astronauts already thought he was loopy. And when he put out that orbit sequence, he would sit and think the sequence back to Dr. Joseph B. Ryan and his colleagues on planet Earth. When they correlated the results, they had a 90% accuracy rate, well beyond probability. Mathematical probability wouldn't even take you there. We all have that. And I'm not saying you have to go up 250,000 miles above planet Earth to learn how to use these tools. You're going to learn how to work with your mind on a different level within 2 days. I can assure you, I am not the person I was in 2004 when I first went to do MindScape. I come from a scientific background. Before most of you were born, I was doing heart transplants with Professor Chris Barnard. So I know a little bit about science. And then my father died at the age of 59 of a brain tumor. So I left the team and I went to take over his business. And I spent the next 30 years in the steel and engineering world. It won't make much sense to many of you who are still too young. But I went back to Pretoria in 1979 at the height of Broederbond apartheid. As an English-speaking woman, to work in the steel and engineering world with very conservative Afrikaners. Everyone said, you will not succeed. I spent 30 years in that industry and I built another business in Cape Town very successfully, and I could not have done it without the support of those men. So that was already, like Chris Barnard, probably some of it rubbed off on me, learning to work with my right brain. Take a chance. Let's see where it takes you. And during that time, I became very left-brained. I am a Leo, which means it's my God-given right to be the center of attention. But something dreadful had happened to me with all that steel and engineering I had become very rigid, very left brain, very computational, dimensions, all the things related to left brain. And then someone dragged me along to the very first MindScape course in South Africa, and I didn't want to go. I was very rigid, 30 years in the steel industry. In fact, I had earned the nickname Die Vrou van Staal, based on an old TV program, Die Man van Staal. And I was a control freak, very bad-tempered, very tough industry to be in. And along that time, I actually got so sick of myself that I even went back to university. My business was doing so well, I could do part-time university, and I went and did my degrees in psychology. And then I got dragged to MindScape, and I went kicking and screaming. Oh, there's a lot of shit. This is woo-woo. And listening to the instructor, I thought, yeah, what a lot of BS. Thank God I moved myself out of my own way. And I thought, well, one of the things Einstein said is that proper science is disproving something. Any fool can prove anything. You can put things together to prove anything, but to disprove something, that's real science. And so I've spent more than 20 years trying to disprove MindScape. I haven't yet. And I know I never will. Because the more I work with it, the more I have developed as a being. You get to meet interesting aspects of yourself. MindScape is a brilliant course for self-development. It's a brilliant course for business. You're all Cape Townians. You know about that nice big soccer stadium in Greenpoint, where we had the World Cup soccer? Well, I used MindScape to get the business for the scaffolding supply of steel. I wanted to get some of the business, a lion's share. It was worth 4.8 million rand. My rep and I got it all through MindScape. You will learn how to tap into the field to start working with your own potential, because we are all amazing beings with unlimited potential. And it doesn't matter what you do in life, whether you're a teacher, a home executive, a drug smuggler, or working with IDB. I won't mention names. Yeah, I've got someone who works with illicit diamond bartering, very good jeweler. We all have abilities. When you learn to tap into universal consciousness, so let's just have a quick look at that. When I first started teaching close on 15 years ago, I had to be a bit careful about what I said because it was still quite woo-woo. You know, we've come a long way in 15 years. When you spoke about universal consciousness, people weren't quite sure what you mean. And universal consciousness is where all the questions and all the answers that ever were or ever will be exist. And if you know how to tap into them, you can get the answers. Yes, it'll be open to your interpretation, but they're there. And if you think about the interconnectivity of us as beings, as being a part of, you can relate universal consciousness really to the ocean. And people talk about the ocean of consciousness as well. And if you were to go down to the beach with a bucket and scoop up some of that bucket of water into that ocean, of the ocean into that bucket, you will have exact replica right down to molecular structure of that ocean. And we are all those buckets. And when you're done with the bucket, if you pour it back into the ocean, there's all the information of everything you've been or have been. And the interesting thing about it is that if you look at the cations, and the cations are the positive charges of mammalian blood, so we're not the only mammals. If you look at the cations of mammalian blood, they have a ratio of 5 to 10 to 160. Calcium, sodium to potassium. Exactly the same as the ocean. And we are 80% water. So we are all of that. We are all of the great consciousness, the universal consciousness, all doing our journey. So in 2 days, you will learn how to meet different aspects of yourself. You will learn to go beyond the boundaries of time and space as you know it. You will learn how to go back in time or forward in time. You will learn how to do your business and your life differently, how to do your health differently. You will learn how to deal with stress differently. Stress won't go away. Stress is part of our lives. But if you deal with stress differently, your health improves. You will learn how to access information in universal consciousness that will help you in whatever field you choose to seek help in. Whether it's studying, whether it's business, whether it's how to help your clients, be you in retail, in psychology, in medicine, engineering, doesn't matter. You are going to learn skills. And the most incredible thing about MindScape is that after only 2 days, if I give you the name and address of someone you've never met, not likely to meet, may not even be on this continent, after just 2 days, you'll be able to tell me how tall they are, more or less how old they are, the color of their hair, the color of their eyes, what they're wearing. And even if you have no knowledge of anatomy and physiology, you'll be able to tell me a little bit about what's going on in their bodies. Am I right, Paula? Am I right, Michaela? Michaela and Paula have done this course before, and they are resitting. And that's not because I'm a lousy teacher, but every time you resit, you learn a little more. So you're going to spend the weekend blowing your own socks off. And provided you practice and use these tools, I guarantee you, you will move beyond your wildest imaginings, way beyond what you've even begun to think you're capable of. You will achieve things way beyond what you imagined. And you will change. You will change as sure as God made little apples. I have been honored and privileged to teach thousands of people all over the world. And many of them have come a long journey with me. I've known Michaela, and you will meet her in person tomorrow, since she was a little girl in primary school. And she's a beautiful, very successful jeweler now. If you use the simple tools, you ain't never gonna be same again, kid. So tomorrow, oh, and before tomorrow, tonight, have a good look in the mirror. Have a look at yourself. And say goodbye. Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye, because you will change if you use these tools. You will grow. You will amaze yourself. You will step into the wonderful potential that you have a God-given right to step into.